Hello everyone, I'm Jenny Asha. I'm a teacher and literature lover, and I've gathered together a collection of some of the notable and shortlisted books from this year's wonderful list to share with you and hopefully inspire you to have a read and take some books into the classroom and the library and share with some children. The first book I'm going to share with you is Winston the Indoor Cat. This one is by Layla Rudge, and we know Layla's illustrations from Gary and No Bears. I love them. These beautiful cats in this one, and the wonderful use of colour. I think this is a book for a younger audience. Winston was an outdoor cat. It was how it had always been, and it suited him perfectly. Until one morning, Winston met the indoor cat. Winston had never seen such a pristine cat, but the window was closed. The indoor cat was trapped. What will Winston do? Look at the colours that Layla Rudge has used to characterise the indoor cat and Winston. So we see this contrast through the book, through the use of colours. These lovely simpler drawings. There's a very surprisingly sophisticated match of written text. The indoor cat agreed that it was exhilarating, but it turned out he didn't really like feeling exhilarated. I can see some word work happening in the classroom with these words, like wonderful, and leisure, or we see leisurely. This way that the cats express their opinions to each other in a polite way. It reminds me a lot of Aesop's Town Mouse and Country Mouse. It's definitely a book about differences of opinions, but embracing each other's differences and enjoying the experience of how other people live sometimes. So it would be a really good conversation starter, I think. The next book I'd like to share with you is Jetty Jumping by the very experienced illustrator, Hannah Somerville, and she's teamed up with Andrea Rowe on Andrea's debut into picture books. It's another one that would be lovely for a younger audience. It has a similar storyline to Tim Winton's The Deep that's illustrated by Karen Louise, but this one is much more appropriate for that younger audience. Look at the illustrations, the way they're conjuring up that sea spray and the warm summer air. Look at this long jetty. In Miller's Town, where the sun kisses the waves and the sand tickles your toes, there is a jetty. It's definitely a read aloud book. Every day, Miller and her friends play under and around and on the jetty. On weekends, they go jetty jumping. Big, brave jumps from the jetty into the deep blue sea. Bonnie twirls, Clementine dives, Matilda horsies, Clancy corkscrews, but not Miller. Miller dangles her legs, bites her lip, and twists her bracelet out on the end of the towering Jetty. A bit of foreshadowing here. She's twisting her bracelet. Why would she be wearing a bracelet? What's going to happen to the bracelet near the water? I could see this being a good opportunity to moral predicting. And then as we see what happens to the bracelet, it's at the complication part of our narrative. Look, she's reaching down, a little bit more predicting. Oh, I'm right. She has dropped her bracelet. This disaster actually serves to be the solution to her problem. She made it. She's overcome her fears, and with a nice bit of repetition, Miller jumps, Miller jumps, Miller jumps. Look at this jetty, towering, it said. Look at the way that exaggerated shape of the jetty really helps to convey Miller's worries and concerns. So there's lots in the illustrations and in the story structure and the interesting verbs, backflips, cartwheels, starfishes and teapots. So this would make for a wonderful springboard for some personal response and some creative writing perhaps. Here's my next one, Jumping Joeys. It's another one that's sure to become a favourite with young readers. I adore Sarah Allen's illustrations and her very carefully chosen sentences. Busy Beaks that she wrote last year, and now she's followed that up with Jumping Joeys. This one focuses on the Australian marsupials. And I discovered reading this book that all Australian marsupial babies are called Joeys. So while there are over 200 marsupials in Australia, again, another fact I learnt from Jumping Joeys, Sarah Allen has chosen 26 to include in her story. So although it's generally informative in purpose, this one, and it shows us lots of recognisable settings, animals doing the things that they do naturally. And there's a sense of, through things like this cutaway, that there is more of a slight scientific treatment to the illustrations. We have short rhyming sentences throughout the main part of the book with the labelling of each of the marsupials' names in both their common name and their scientific name. So again, there's a bit of a scientific informative purpose coming through. But we learn the facts as we follow the day and discover the creatures that are nocturnal and that are moving through the night, or the crepuscular ones in twilight, through to the animals that move around and hunt and are active in the daytime. So we follow through the day. Then at the end of the book, Sarah Allen has included some factual information that is following that true information report style about each of the 26 animals included in her book. So this would be a great one for as a springboard for writing about our favourite marsupials. It might encourage some further research an investigation of the different animals using different texts. We certainly learn from both parts of the text. So we could look at the way that rhyming words help make the text engaging and progress the events along. Let's put that one there. What's next? Now we have the elephant, the boy and the elephant. Now this is a wordless picture book from Freya Blackwood. It's a tender fantasy story exploring the power of imagination and the transformative impact of spending time in nature. We see our young protagonist not quite fitting in the expansive concrete school setting, concrete playground. It seems his heart lies amongst the trees. There are elements of the illustrations that remind me of Libby Gleason and Armin Greta's An Ordinary Day. There he is, feeling lonely in the concrete jungle of the school playground. I can see elements of the runaway hug here. And even elements of Aaron Becker's Journey, another wordless picture book. But it's when he discovers that the tree is going to be cut down if he doesn't do something. And these illustrations where he's creeping, tiptoeing out of the house to visit the trees next door. This section reminds me a lot of Raymond Briggs' The Snowman. It has that magical quality, the witching hour, the nighttime, quiet and stillness, the child creeping about. But instead of having our little protagonist go on a magical fly through the air with our snowman, we see him do something else very magical. Tries to budge the trees, and his love of them animates them, brings them to life. So he's relocating this menagerie, this treed menagerie, and he reinvigorates, to the bewilderment of the developers, he reinvigorates his playground. And he finds a like-minded friend. So it would be a wonderful story to encourage a lot of oral language, to encourage storytelling, maybe a page opening as a starting point for stories or descriptive writing. It could be a springboard for drama or other creative responses. How about our next one? Blue Flower by Sonia Hartnett and Gabrielle Evans. Now, I remember Sonia Hartnett from her novels like The Silver Donkey. And Gabrielle Evans is the illustrator of a shortlisted book from last year, Norton and the Bear. So in this book, Gabrielle Evans uses this lovely painterly, sketchy style. And it really supports the storyline where our young narrator discovers her talent for painting, along with a number of other things that make her wonderfully different. He's created these very personable little characters. It's quite remarkable, I think, how personable they are, considering they are very it's very evidently sketched, and they have these adorably exaggerated heads and just 2 dots for eyes, but there's a lot of emotion that Evans manages to convey through these seemingly simplistic drawings. Now, the first part, we see the narrator being overwhelmed at school, and I'm sure they're feelings that we would all resonate with, whether it's remembering what it was like starting primary school or changing schools, or maybe returning to school after a long time schooling from home, perhaps. So it's sure to strike a chord with children who've been experiencing those things lately. What else can I show you? Let me read this part. Here we have the mum character. Mum was making our favourite macaroni and cheese. She said, "Being different isn't easy until you decide it's a good thing to be." "Is that what I am?" I asked. "Just different?" "Just different," said Mum. "Just something as wonderful as that." "Wonderful," I scoffed. "I'm not wonderful." "Who says so?" asks Mum. So we can see here how Sonia Hartnett's used dialogue to characterise and help progress the story along, and to really truly convey the theme. I think teamed up with books like Mr. Huff by Anna Walker or Parachute by Danny Parker and Matt Botley, I think Blue Flower could be the basis for an English and PDH integrated unit on resilience and positive attitudes. Now, the next 3 books I want to share with you are thematically linked to a degree. They're linked through the topic of climate change, but they're appropriate for very different audiences. So let's have a look at Iceberg first of all. This is accessible from early childhood. Then I will talk to you about Just One Bee, which is a bit more for a bit of an older audience. I think it could be used with lower primary, later in lower primary through to upper primary, while The Inheritance is definitely for a much older audience. I think stage 3 students could delve into this one, but it's definitely even up into a high school age audience. Let's have a closer look at each of them. Let's have a look at Iceberg. Now, this is A Circular Tale by Claire Saxby and Jess Ratcliffe, and we see a very unusual main character, the iceberg. And as we follow the iceberg through the seasons in the Antarctic, we learn about this unique environment. We're given an ice shelf point of view throughout the book, and we learn about the marine animals and the birds and what happens to them across the seasons. It's got these lovely watery jewel-like illustrations. We're sent plunging into the depths along with the animals underwater. And the written text itself directly encourages us to look deeper, look beneath the surface, and think about the animals that are there beneath the water and on the ice in this supposedly barren environment, with the implications that if we think about these animals and this ecosystem and how vulnerable it is, then we might reconsider some of our choices and the impacts that human choices make on the environment. Just One Bee is from Marguerite Lamond and Anthony Bettini and illustrated by Christopher Nielsen. And this one is a very intentionally with a theme linked to climate change. It's intended to help children learn about the important role bees play in our world. And the reader joins one bee in her attempt to reflower the natural environment that's been left barren. Got lots of cartoon motifs coming through, the good versus evil. And you'll notice our little 1B character has these distinctive blonde plaits, as the team wanted to make sure that there were some clear motifs linking just this 1B to Greta Thunberg. And we've got the inclusion of this balloon, a blue balloon that she carries, a sense of childlike hope and joy that she wants to bring to the world, even in the face of hardened characters like this fella, Other Bee, he's called. So there's some inclusion of some facts all the way through the book. It's embedded these facts about bees and their impact on the world. So there's truly an intention from the authors and illustrators that children will learn about what they can do to help. Just one change to children's attitudes, to the choices they make, all add up together to make change. And then we have the inheritance. Now this one is in a similar style to a number of the books that Greta has created recently. Here's partly worded strong moral tales, the island, the Mediterranean, and diamonds. And so the inheritance joins those three. And this one's dealing with the impact of human choices on the environment and the generational choices and the influence of those. So when family members disagree on how to respond to their father's dying wish to respect what I have built and make it prosper, we see the male characters questioning their sister, and the worded part of the book concludes with, what is the problem? And then we are visually shown just what the problems are. And so we've got Greta's characteristic moody illustrations, they're very emotive, and they take up roughly half the book. And so there's lots of opportunity for discussion, for inference, for further research to think about the facts around this type of impact and what it means to our world. It's quite a challenging read, quite confronting in parts, so teachers would have to use it carefully and consider how appropriate it was for their particular class. There isn't any solutions in the book for the environmental problems. Unlike Just One Bee, that does make very specific suggestions of actions that are positive that children can take. There's none really put forward in this book. So that would be one of the reasons why teachers would have to think about how to approach it. Although the sister character stands up to the pervading thought. And so I guess if we think that critical literacy is about questioning the power structures, about challenging the status quo, the sister character is a good role model for us in that regard. So this could be a good text to think about critical literacy and to teach that, encourage children to use that critical literacy on text. There's some interesting choices typographically. We have words nestled around these characters here with a suggestion that they're whispering and they're colluding. And we have up here the way that the writing extends right into the gutter of the book. And that could be possibly read symbolically as well. There's some difference in font size and some italics that imply a change in tone of voice and volume. So it would be a very good read aloud book for that reason. So that's The Inheritance. The next book is Walking in Gagaju Country. So this one is a non-fiction book, and it's in the category with the Eve Pownell Awards this year. And it's written by Diane Lucas, Ben Tyler and Emma Long. And Diane Lucas, as a teacher and author, has teamed up with Ben Tyler, who's an Indigenous man, and Emma Long brings her experience to the illustrations. So we've got some quite detailed illustrations, as you can see from the cover, and there's a scientific sort of approach to some of the illustrations, some more informative techniques applied. So Emma Long includes some close-ups, some zoom-ins to further illustrate elements of the environment. Another close-up zoom-in. But we also see the use of illustrations within the written text that act a bit like a key or a code as we're reading. The written text reads, it's very spoken-like. It reads like a conversation between Diane and Ben as they're walking through this environment, sharing their knowledge, asking questions of each other. And we hear a lot of the traditional knowledge that Ben shares about the natural environment, the flora and fauna in this area. So it would be a great one to use as a factual text, learning about the elements of this beautiful natural environment and including those Indigenous perspectives from the original carers of this particular environment. My second non-fiction book that I'm going to share with you today is Still Alive. Now, this is a graphic novel created by Safdar Ahmed to tell the stories of people he met while he was visiting Sydney's Villawood Immigration Detention Centre, where he was giving art therapy and conducting art classes. So the blurb describes this book as interweaving journalism and history and autobiography. And Ahmed gives quite scathing commentary on Australia's refugee policy and includes some very skillful caricatures of politicians though with historically accurate depictions of the policy. So it poses some quite strong challenges to that political rhetoric. We have an example here with Pauline Hanson and Philip Ruddock, to name, just to show you an example of just a few of the politicians that Ahmed has included. He personalises the issue, though, with inclusions of the artworks of some of the detainees that he worked with whilst visiting Villawood, and he uses their illustrations as part of their individual stories that he's devoted chapters of the book to. So he's truly trying to work against the political narrative of depersonalising, dehumanising asylum seekers, and really trying to help the reader to see the effects of Australia's policy on individual people. So there's some very confronting images at times, and I mean that is the aim of this book, to help the reader understand the awful situations that refugees have faced in their home country on their journey to Australia, and whilst in Australia under detention in various places. But that said, I don't know that we would be able to use this book in its entirety in the primary classroom, because there are some quite graphic elements of those stories. So that's not to say that we couldn't use extracts. There's some, it's a great example of the way that art and literature can be used to challenge the status quo. And it would be great to use some of the political images to really apply critical thinking and critical literacy skills. We've got a symbolism as a strong feature through the text, so that could also be explored. And the way that Ahmed has applied his style, his stylistic features in his graphic novel would be worth looking at closely. Now it's time to move on to the novels. The first one I'm going to share is A Glass House of Stars. Now this story is set in the 1970s in Australia, and it explores the migrant experiences of adjusting to a new country, new food, clothes, schooling system, trying to fit in at a new school, all while being able to, or not being able to speak very much of the local language. For the main characters, these experiences are made all the more difficult by having to cope with the loss of her father in a car accident soon after they arrive in Australia. So there's elements of coping with grief that the story deals with as well. Now, there's some quite unusual literary techniques that help tell the story, and I think that what we see in here is some elements of Chinese fairy tales. Shirley Ma talks about the fact in the back here that she's been influenced by that form of literature and oral storytelling growing up. So I dare say that that's what we're seeing here. There's an exaggeration or a use of hyperbole to describe aspects of the setting. The house that the family live in, this main character calls it big scary. But it's more than personification. It's more of a literal application of this personification rather than metaphorical sense, because the house expands or contracts in response to its moods or the needs of its residents. So we see the house adding rooms when there's some visitors coming for the funeral, then it contracts again in response to the grief of the family. This glass house in the backyard also has magical qualities that help its visitors, the main character and her friends, to understand each other's migrant stories and struggles, and to experience healing and to see the positive side of their situations. So it's very unusual for Australian fiction, or the Australian fiction that I've read at least. It's told in second person. And this truly gives a sense of immediacy or even urgency at times, and could help the reader to truly sort of step into the shoes of the main character. Though I must admit, it took me some getting used to while I was reading it, and it made me very aware of the constructedness of the story, probably because I'm unused to reading stories written in this way. Let me read you a little bit. This is the section where we're going into the glass house. You laugh in delight. Then you take the 2 glasses of fresh orange juice from the cat, and you bow deeply to her while she bows deeply back. Josh takes the glass you hand him with wonder and suspicion, but he has a sip anyway. You take hold of his sleeve and lead him to the glass house. He has a right to frown as a pane in the roof randomly cracks and falls inwards. Taking hold of the door handle and beckoning him to follow, you squeeze your eyes tight as you slip in, feeling him follow behind. You don't dare open your eyes until you hear the gasp escape from Josh. Then you feel your face relax under the warmth of the sun, now high in the sky. The conventions you are bound by in the normal world disappear, and you smile to see your world of orange trees, endless blue, and forget-me-not fields. Like a book of black and white drawings, you are filling it with your favourite colours. The moon in the sky has become a crescent as she wears a veil on the part of her face that has disappeared. "What is this place?" Josh exclaims. "You see it too?" Josh nods quietly. You call out for First Uncle, but First Uncle does not appear to be there. Perhaps he has gone out shopping. You lead Josh to the precious box of seeds, and you open the lid and indicate that he can take one. He takes a long time to choose, as he seems to be looking for something in particular, frowning behind his glasses. Then his face eases. He smiles, and he shows you the seed in his palm, sad looking and wrinkled, as though it is already old. Together you help Josh plant and water the seed. Then you both quietly stand back and finish drinking your juice. The wind in the glass house blows quietly. Your forget-me-nots flutter, and your blue wisteria trees gently sways. Then, from the damp soil, the first shoot pushes through. As it moves and dances up towards the rays of the sun, it tells you a story. You see a large family in a foreign country, and huddled among them is a boy you recognise as your younger Josh. He has lost a lens out of his glasses, but it looks as though he has no choice but to wear the broken pair, as there is no replacement in sight. As the first leaf appears on the shoot, you see an entire building crumble and turn to dust as the young plant gains more leaves and pushes the sky away. You see the largest sea of people you have ever seen, all moving in one direction, snaking into a single file on the dust road as the dust road narrows. You want to know where you're all going, but you have the feeling that you don't really know either. They don't really know either, and your stomach hurts. You search frantically for Josh. Suddenly, he's not next to you anymore, but lost somewhere in the mass. In relief, you see him clinging to the back of his father like a scared monkey. Mostly he has to walk for himself, though, like everyone else. The lens is still missing from his glasses. The seedling has now become a young tree, but it is still growing. You see so many rows of tents, so many borders and roads, so much hunger and heat. The young tree grows into a strong tree, and out of the blue you see an aeroplane. And feel a sense of hope. You see Josh and his family strapped into seats. The words, "I've been there too," jump into your throat, and you promise him in your mind that where he is going, he will be able to get a new lens for his glasses. The trees are now flowering, and the small clusters of white blossoms lose their petals and become green fruit that slowly turns a deep, shiny shade of black. You turn your head, and the Josh of today is by your side, a pair of large square glasses that contain both lenses balanced on his nose. He has a sad look on his face, but it is also thoughtful and reflective. Back home, we had olive trees that were 6,000 years old. Home. It's such a confusing word for you, as it could mean the village your family came from, or it could be that island home in the middle that you liked best, or it could be this two-story home Uncle left you. A Glass House of Stars. Next one. Rabbit, Soldier, Angel, Thief. This one's by Katrina Nanstead, and she also wrote We Are Wolves that was shortlisted last year in the books for younger readers category. And this novel would be a really good companion to We Are Wolves. We Are Wolves followed the journey of German children, Liesel, Otto and Mia Wolf, after the advance of the Russian army saw them fleeing their home. But Rabbit, Soldier, Angel, Thief is a really good comparison because it focuses on telling a World War II story from the point of view of a Russian child. We first encounter Sasha in his hospital bed, recovering from injuries that have apparently left him very emotionally scarred as well as physically injured. So much so that he's unable to remember, let alone tell the details of his story. Gradually, he does open up, and we discover why he has stolen the strange, seemingly unrelated objects that have given him the fourth name in the title, Thief. With the use of these symbolic items, he tells the story of when he was separated from his mother, who called him Little Rabbit, and was taken into the company of Russian army. It became his family and gave him love and purpose. Katrina Nanstead has based her story on very well researched facts from World War II and the experiences of soldiers and civilians alike, and that truly comes through in the storyline and through the emotion of the tale. And it's a story of the power of love and the power of small loving acts to sustain us in even devastating situations. I think it encourages the reader to predict, how did Sasha end up in the hospital? What do these names mean? What's the relevance of the thieved items? And so there's good opportunities for practicing comprehension strategies and inferring, making connections and clarifying predictions as you were reading through this book. It would make sense to discuss the symbolism that's evident through Sasha's stolen items and the way that seemingly unrelated objects can act as carriers for our memories. And because of the way that Sasha tells stories to help him heal emotionally and to help recount the parts of his journey to the hospital where we discover him, then I think follow-up activities that involve classroom storytelling would be very relevant. I'll read you a little section so that you can get a taste of this book. Chapter 16 I'm reading from. I'm in a trench, shaking badly because I can't stop giggling. I giggle until I get the hiccups. I pop a sweet into my mouth, suck on it, hiccup, and giggle some more. I'm giggling because of the sweet. It's a long time since I tasted sugar, and it's dancing around my mouth like a billion bumblebee ballerinas. But mostly I'm giggling because I'm relieved. I've been caught by Red Army soldiers, not German monsters. I'm surrounded by strangers, but these strangers are comrades, and the chicken is running back and forth along the trench, clucking angrily, cluck, 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 cluckety, cluck, cluck. I found the other Red Army company that was lost in the deep, dark forest, or rather, they found me. The soldiers squat around me, their eyes sparkling with surprise and joy. He's the tiniest comrade ever, and with the tiniest uniform to match. Look how young he is. He's hardly 5. I'm 6, I shout, and soon I'll be 7. They all laugh, but I don't know why. I'm Lieutenant Maria Iliani, says the soldier who gave me the sweet. What's your name? I stand up tall, poke out my belly, and salute. Private Sasha. Some soldiers laugh, but others press their hands to their hearts. He's gorgeous. What a honey. I wish we had a soldier like Private Sasha in our regiment. I say, can I have my chicken back now? I'm sorry, Private Sasha, says Lieutenant Maria, but she is our chicken, and a very important chicken indeed. All chickens are important when you're hungry, I reply. Very true, she agrees, but we have been stalking this chicken for days, slowly, cautiously, because the Germans are scattered through the forest and we suspect they have been stalking the chicken too. We are all hungry for meat. I don't care, I pout. If the Germans are so hungry, they should run home to Germany and get their mamas to make them chicken soup from German chickens instead of stealing our Russian chickens. The soldiers chuckle, pleased with my words. And you don't need meat, I cry. You have all these delicious sweets to eat. My comrades have eaten nothing but kasha for the last week, so I think it is only fair that I get the chicken. After all, I caught it. And we caught you, Lieutenant Maria laughs. I feel foolish. I scrunch my nose, but before I have time to brood, another sweet is popped into my mouth, and I'm carried along the trenches to meet more comrades. So you can see from the first person the way that it's Sasha telling his story. I think you'll thoroughly enjoy reading all of it. Here's my next one, The Detective's Guide to Ocean Travel. Now in this book, we join our protagonist, Pepper Stark, on a trip aboard the RMS Aquitania, a sister ship of the Titanic, though the story is set a number of years after the Titanic has sunk. It's a detective story, as the title suggests, and it's in the vein of much older books like Emile and the Detectives by Eric Kastner, or The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit. It uses this motif as child as hero that is reminiscent of these older tales, but it has one very notable point of difference in the way that we can certainly tell it's written in a modern context. Because although it's set in the past, the main character is a first-class passenger, part of the elite social class, and we see her challenging the cultural and social norms of the time in a way that would not have been typical of real children from the same historical, cultural, social setting. It would be interesting to use stories from the past, like The Railway Children or Emile and the Detectives, or even Enid Blyton books, to contrast and highlight these differences in challenging stereotypical thinking. There's some wonderful vocabulary that could be highlighted. I took a list from just one chapter, and we had sulphurous with fury and snaggle-toothed, wonderment, waspish, unperturbed, baleful, and one of my favourites, hornswoggler. I must admit that I had to look up some of the definitions of some of the vocabulary. There's lots of rich metaphor and simile that help with the descriptions of the setting and the events. Characterisation occurs in part through the dialogue, and Nikki Greenberg represents accented English well in some of her dialogue, and she uses it to help some intentionally simplistic stereotypical characterisation for some of her side characters. Although it's a story with an historical setting, the themes of how difficult it is when struggling with grief for lost ones that have passed away, or even distant, closed off living relatives, it comes through in a way that's very relevant for today. Let me read you a little bit, and I'll show you another feature of the text here, the way that the parts of the boat, the ship, are described. Chapter 9. Getting back outside was harder than Pepper expected. The ship's plush interior was a labyrinth. After a few turns, she had no idea if she was facing forward or aft, starboard or port. She eventually found the main staircase, then wandered about on A deck in confusion until at last she happened upon a companionway up. She drifted up one side of the boat deck and back down the other, hoping that she might spy Toby somewhere. There was no sign of him. She wished she'd stayed with Nora after all. It wasn't that much fun wandering about on her own with no one to talk to. Everybody else seemed to be bundled up in couples or families or tight little groups. Imagine travelling with your family. The thought formed before she remembered that her family was here, or the one driftwood stick of it that remained anyway. She'd hardly seen the captain since they'd come aboard. He had disappeared into his own world of command, where there was no place for her. But then, what had she expected? Did she really imagine that the two of them would spend the voyage side by side, gazing out over the prow together like old seafaring companions? It was ridiculous, of course, but she felt foolish to admit it even to herself. In her secret, falling asleep thoughts, that was just the kind of thing she had imagined, a voyage shared, a story that they could make together. A little girl ran down the deck squealing with excitement. Pepper watched as her mother caught her, lifted her in the air, then swung her back down into a joyous embrace. What must it feel like, Pepper wondered, to have somebody who loves you like that? She felt a stab of loneliness under her ribs. She had no memories of her mother, not a smell that evoked her presence, not an impression of her touch, not the faintest echo of the sound of her voice. She wrapped her fingers around the locket that held her mother's photograph. She knew the picture by heart. She stared at it so hard, so often, straining to extract some knowledge of the person inside. But without her father to conjure Beatrix Stark's memory, the photograph gave Pepper nothing beyond itself. Grey tones on paper, forming shape of a young woman's face that slightly remembered Pepper's own. And the captain gave her hardly anything more. You'll be pleased to know that the relationship between Pepper and her father is resolved. There is a reconciliation that is rounded off towards the end of the book after some wonderful adventurous action by the main characters. Quite a different book to that previous one is Exit Through the Gift Shop. Although there is this theme of grief as an important element to this novel, it is much more than just a story about dying. It's very much more a story about living. And although the main character does have a terminal cancer diagnosis, these other themes of family and friends and the support that they can give you through life's hard times come through. There's issues that they have to face like bullying and stalking and cyberbullying, and it's dealt with in a very loving and compassionate way in the context of a blended family. So the story will resonate with lots of children, I think. There's a number of metafictive devices that are particularly prevalent in this book. It is a series of diary entries, and the narrator tells us that she's writing it for an English assignment. And throughout her entries, she reflects on and recounts her experiences in first person, and she also directly addresses the reader and talks straight at us. Metaphors are a key feature too, the most prominent one being the title of the book, Exit Through the Gift Shop. And the narrator explains that this is her metaphor that helps her to reflect on how she believes that gathering memories and souvenirs from life's important events are one of the things that helps her to cope with her diagnosis. There's also clear evidence of the constructedness of the text. There's inclusions of doodling and drawing, and we've got some her own version of the Urban Dictionary where she defines certain words that she's using in her diary. And there's some experimentation with typography too. That adds to the personalisation of the story. And along with that first person, the voice of a preteen, an almost teenager, it comes across very clearly. Now, I want to encourage you. I'm a reader who is often brought to tears by events in stories, and this is a deeply emotive book, but I did not find it to be a sad one. I actually finished the book with a smile on my face, feeling quietly uplifted, even though it's quite clear at the end that the story is finished because the narrator can't write anymore. Another book with some quite heavy themes, covered in quite a delicate, compassionate way, is Dragonskin by Karen Foxley. Now, Karen Foxley wrote one of my all-time favourite books, Lenny's Book of Everything. And when I bought Dragonskin for a family member, I was really urging them to hurry up and read it so that I could get into it as well. Now, Karen Foxley doesn't shy away from difficult, heavy topics. And in this one, she's dealing with the main characters escaping domestic violence and grieving the loss of a close friend in a car accident. So she's created these very real characters who experience the tough stuff of life, but who get through the use of their imagination and the way they draw on friendship. There's a really strong fantasy element, as you can probably tell from the cover, is this dragon skin. And this is what Pip, the main character, she discovers an egg and she's protecting it and she's nurturing it once it hatches. And the experience is not all positive rewards. Caring for the dragon comes at a physical cost to Pip. And one of the costs is that she's developing this dragon skin. But in the process, she develops some new friendships that open her up to the realities of other children's lives. They help her to sort of open her eyes a bit and broaden her experience and help her to focus less on her own grief and the difficulties in her own life without downplaying them. And this leads Pip to really develop empathy. And that's symbolised by this dragon skin that she gradually grows across the story. But instead of it making her more thick-skinned, more numbed to hard emotions in life, the dragon skin actually helps her to become more sensitive, more accepting, and in turn, she becomes a much stronger person. Now, I don't want to give too much away about this one, no spoilers, but it will give you all the feels and it will become a real favourite. Karen Foxley is a very clever storyteller. And my last one for today is My Brother Ben. Now, I've just started reading this one. I'm part way through and I'm already hooked. It has some elements of childhood adventure stories in a modern day Australian suburban bush setting. It's touching on some topics of brotherly love and not so loving brotherly interactions and dealing with divorce. There's a motif throughout of a magpie that the main characters, Ben and Luke, brothers, that they found the magpie injured and they've nursed her back to health. And she becomes a symbol of attachment and connection while still maintaining her wild freedom. So I'm detecting, again, another example of a theme of the transformative power of spending time in nature. As a bird lover, I've spent a lot of time looking and listening for birds in the bush. And I think the author must have also. He describes the song of particular birds really well in a way that means I can recognise the bird calls, and it helps to transport me into the setting of the story. I think that this is a book that I'll be recommending to all the boys in my life, because while Luke and Ben are outdoorsy boys, they aren't two-dimensional characters. They have their ups and downs, but there's a sensitivity and a gentleness about their relationship with each other that's really to be celebrated. I think I'm going to be sad to finish this one. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've been inspired to go looking for some of these books and you can enjoy reading them yourself and with the children in your life. Happy reading, everyone.